Welcome. I'm Sebastian Mahfood, and you're listening to WCAT Radio, the on-air wing of En Route Books and Media, bringing you the dulcet sounds of Catholic wisdom.
Welcome, Monsignor.
Thank you, Teresa.
We are in show number 20.
Wow, 20, wow.
20 already,
Okay.
Yep. And I think last time we left off, we were prepared to talk about the Osage Indians
That's
here
right.
in St. Louis.
Yes, that's what we're going to talk about. You remember there was a book called The Founding of St. Louis by J. Friedrich Fouts.
Yes.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And he entitled one of the subsections of his chapter on the Osage, he entitled it this, Fashioning St. Louis Operations, the Osage as Co-Founders.
Oh, wow.
And that's a nice way of saying that, I think, and we'll just jump right in. Yeah, and so it's important for us. We've been concentrating now on this little village of around 700 people, and it's now important for us to look beyond the crest of the hill, which is now Broadway Avenue.
Okay.
And then go beyond that up to 12th Street and beyond, which is the Prairie to St. Louis and Mill Creek and into the interior of Missouri. And we'll come to know a mighty nation, which is the group with which Pierre Leclerc and Auguste Chouteau and Maxent Leclerc de Compagnie and Governor Carolerac and Dabadie and Aubry and all of these others had been wanting to have a commercial alliance with these people.
Yes.
And that's that whole thrust. That's why St. Louis was founded, was in order to get up there and get a relationship going. And that way it would preserve the French croissant, at least the lower part, and it would orient it toward the west rather than toward the east. So our best sources are in this, Faust's Founding St. Louis, Prim's Lion of the Valley, that's the standard history of St. Louis, and then, of most important, an in-depth book by Louis Burns. It's the history of the Osage people. It came out in 2004. I would say it's probably, if not the definitive, it's close to the definitive history of the Osage. And as we were discussing right before the program, Burns himself is got some mixed blood. He's part Osage himself and part French and part Scottish. Interesting combination.
Fit right in St. Louis, I think.
Yes, I would. Yeah, definitely.
We have it all.
This is Burns points out that the Osage have a murky past, like most Native Americans do. There's no written history, and so we have to go back and look at archaeology. But the archaeological evidence is absolutely incredible.
Okay.
We can trace these people, the Osage people, we can trace them along the Ohio River and the Tennessee River. That area is continually occupied by these people from 8,000 BC.
Oh, my goodness.
To 1300 AD. Yeah, when if you're looking at Western history, we're going back before the pyramids.
Wow.
Yeah. They're part of a woodlands culture, and eventually, after 1300, they migrated, for whatever reason we don't know, but they migrated west of the Mississippi. And now their stronghold is along the Missouri River, and especially south of the Missouri River, along the Arkansas River, and then westward into what is now eastern Kansas and eastern Oklahoma. Gives them a huge geographic and environmental advantage. Mm-hmm. So the entire Ozark Mountain Range is their nation. Burns points out that there are 4 climate zones in which the Osage Nation resides. And I want to talk about those a little bit because the major one, it gives them a huge advantage, although those of us living in St. Louis now don't necessarily think of it as an advantage. He refers to it, Burns refers to it as the long summer, humid continental climate. That describes it. Especially if you ever had to live through a St. Louis summer. That describes it. Now, we see that as a discomfort.
Right.
Because we live in air-conditioned homes. Mm-hmm. We run real fast to our air-conditioned car in order to drive to our air-conditioned work. And so, frankly, it takes a certain amount of courage for a St. Louisan to go out at night into a Cardinals game, or to the Muni Opera performances or a band concert at Tower Grove Park, and it can be an ordeal.
Yes,
At least we think it is. They didn't think so. The Osage thought it was just wonderful. This is the way Burns describes the long summer, humid continental climate. He says,
I like that.
Yeah, I do. He says, vegetation in the long summer, humid continental climate is characterized by vast hardwood forests with a dense undergrowth. Grassy openings, prairies, are scattered throughout the region. Hardwood such as walnut, hickory, pecan, chestnut, hazelnut, and oak were a source of nuts for the people of the middle waters. Berries and pawpaws grew in the undergrowth and at the edge of the prairies. Oxbow lakes, which left as remnants from the old river courses, provided lily roots and potatoes. Prairies were especially abundant in deer, elk, and sometimes buffalo. The hills, with their caves, sheltered many bears. When all the various factors involved are taken into consideration, the humid continental climates of the world are the most favorable climates for human activity. At the present time in man's history, peoples of these climates control the entire world.
It makes sense.
It does.
If it's good for animals and vegetation,
yeah,
it's good for people.
It does. And we deprive ourselves of that by hiding in the air conditioning,
That's
but
right.
that's not going to stop me.
No, truly it won't. I do enjoy that bit of modern day culture, yes.
Yeah, same way. Well, all of this wonderful food and nuts and berries and venison and everything else really benefited the Osage over generations.
Sure.
When the French arrived, remember the average Frenchman is about 5'2", 5'4", maybe, okay? When they arrived and they saw the Osage, they were looking at giants. The average Osage is 6 foot.
Oh, my gosh.
Yeah, even the women.
Wow.
Even the women, 6 feet tall, and it was not uncommon to find them at 7 feet.
Oh, my gosh. I had no idea.
And these are big people, and they're not skinny either. And so that's the climate most of them live in. And then their nation is so big, it extends into other climates, including what he refers to as, in the West, a subhumid and dry continental climate. So what we're having there is lots of plains with grasslands, okay, not the large hardwood forests that you'd had before, but plains and grasslands, and as a result of that, lots of buffalo, as well as other grazing animals. That's going to be the route of the cattle ranges.
The drives,
in the 19th and early 20th century. Now, if you go further south, you being from Arkansas, we're well aware of the humid subtropical climate.
Yes, indeed.
Yeah, which can only be enjoyed with a mint julep. So we're thinking about northern Arkansas, we're thinking about eastern Oklahoma, and there
That's home.
it is, and you've lots of plant life again, right? Ozarks coming to an end.
Yes.
Okay, so if you're looking at northern Arkansas, north of the Arkansas River, we've got that. The Arkansas River is for the Osage pretty much the boundary. They don't do much further south than that. And the whole idea is to use that area as a boundary to keep invaders from invading in. This whole area is naturally secure. I mean, to the east, you've got the Mississippi River, and not a lot of people are going to try to get across that Mississippi, It's a natural deterrent for most Indians, okay? No large-scale invasions. Some canoes, if you're going to have people that even deal with canoes, but as we saw earlier, a lot of the Midwestern natives had to learn how to do canoes. So that was not that big. To the north and to the northwest, you've got the Missouri River, which is also a formidable river. To the south, those vast lands between the Arkansas River and the Ozark Mountains. And out to the west, fact of the matter is that there are very few warlike people that would be neighbors to the Osage. Now, when you get way further west, into the Plains Indians, another story entirely. But as far as Kansas is concerned, the people, the Native Americans living in Kansas at this point, tend to be sedentary farmers.
Okay.
They're not real warriors. So the Osage have what you might call Fortress Ozark. It's easily defended. It's tough terrain with the old mountains, not exactly the Rocky Mountains by any means.
Right.
You know,
right.
the tallest mountain in that whole range is Tom Sauk, and that's only 1,700 feet, so yards rather. And so it's it's not that terribly big, but there are lots of ravines, lots of forests, lots of swamps, lots of glades. And if you looked at the territory itself, it's basically Missouri, south of the Missouri River, west of the Mississippi River, all the way over to eastern Kansas, eastern Oklahoma, northern Arkansas. And this is all patrolled. It's all patrolled by a cavalry of between 1,500 and 2,000 warriors.
Wow.
Yeah, wow is right. I mean, the census in 1771 that was taken of Louisiana, the entire Louisiana colony, had only 1,507 males. That's including New Orleans and St. Louis together.
And we've got nearly 2,000 of the Osage cavalry.
Just cavalry.
Just the cavalry,
Yeah.
right.
It's good to have them on our side.
I would think that's an alliance they did want to make.
Yeah, right. Later on the Spanish are going to get very upset with them, and they're going to talk about having a war to exterminate them and all that kind of stuff. And the St. Louisans are going, you don't want to go there. So here's a little bit about the communities themselves. They're very interesting, highly developed peoples. First of all, you have what's known as the division chief villages.
Okay.
And these villages are, they're permanent. Okay, so they're there, and you stay there. The center of the village itself is a lodge for the village chiefs. And the whole village, in Osage villages, are always oriented toward the east and west. It's always east-west, not north-south. It's always east-west. And the center of that is always made up of the governmental, cultural, and religious section. Think about what Laclede did when he came and founded St. Louis. You had those three.
Those are the 3 blocks.
3 blocks right there, yeah. So when the Osage came to St. Louis, their first thought was, oh, this guy, he's pretty smart. Yeah. Then you have other villages that go out from these, and they're called band villages, and they're more numerous. They're also permanent. Basically, they're where you would find natural supplies of fuel and like wood, fresh water, game, and agriculture. The agriculture with the Osage people was always done by women. I didn't think they trusted the men to do that. Then you had others that are called seasonal hunting villages. What these were, villages that were set up, but they were only occupied during the hunting seasons. Basically, that was done 3 times a year. You had a spring hunt and a fall hunt, and this is for buffalo. And basically, that would be going out to Kansas. You also had a late fall hunt, with going close to winter, and that would be for deer and bear and elk. And these were organized by the entire nation. So it was like hundreds and hundreds of hunters would be involved in this. Now, individuals could go hunting on their own. There was no restrictions against that. But these would be organized by the nation. And then these villages had lodges that were there, although nobody lived there except during the hunting times. And so the poles for the lodges were permanent. And the Osage would simply bring the skins and cover them over, and then they would have their cabins in that way. There's also another kind of village called the teepee campgrounds. These were only in the west and the south, and they were only for extended hunts. The Osage did not live in teepees. They would be very insulted to hear that. You camp in teepees. You don't live in them, at least those guys. Typically, the division chief villages and the band villages would have, maybe about 100 men. These are able-bodied men, a population of perhaps 200 to 400 altogether.
Okay.
Now, when you consider St. Louis has only got 700 people in the entire city, and you've got these band villages and division villages around, that's pretty considerable. All of these villages are tied together by what we call them Osage trails. but they really were highways for their time. Many of them were wide enough that you could actually ride 8 horses side by side.
Wow.
So we have this impression of, everyone going one by one.
Right.
No, these were major.
8 horses wide.
Yeah, 8 horses wide. They were also guarded. So, just not anybody could go down those trails. If anyone came in and he did not have a reason to be there, if he was not Osage, typically what happened was the guards would whip him and send him on his way.
Wow.
Yeah. But, and this gets to be
Don't
real
try to
bad.
come back.
Don't come back. But even worse than that, don't poach.
Oh,
Because
yeah.
if they find you with game,
That's
execution immediately. The nation itself was dominated by ruled, more dominated than ruled actually, by a group. The translation for the name is the Society of Little Old Men. As you can imagine.
The wise ones.
Yes, that was the whole idea. They were the wise ones. And one branch of our government is also named the old men, the Senate, right? It comes from senatus, and another word that comes from that is senile. And, not to press that too far, but,
Right,
but the idea is that you have wiser and older people who would be able to do that. And interestingly enough, the Society of Little Old Men broke down into 3 branches of government.
Oh, my gosh.
Some of them made the laws. Others executed the laws. And there were others who their job was to judge the laws that were being executed.
It sounds like we may have learned something from them.
Well, interesting, yeah. Burns has a theory on that I'll say something about in a couple minutes. But, it is that tripartite government is very interesting. Now, the Society of Little Old Men are assisted by what's called the division chiefs. These are the heads of those major division villages, and they govern locally. And their object is to keep the peace. And that's really important because they always have to ride herd on some of the young warriors.
They know it all.
Typical teenagers,
Yep.
There are blood ties that are found in these villages, in these settlements. But one of the things one of the hard and fast rules is that you cannot marry within your own clan. And so every village had to have at least 2 clans.
Oh, interesting. See, they were very wise.
Yeah, and basically the village chiefs would continue ruling until the day came when there was a vote of no confidence.
Okay.
Either he was getting too old or senile, or he was making unpopular decisions, and then the village simply would vote with its feet and join another band chief. And that's how officers came and went. Interestingly enough, among the Society of the Little Old Men, there were also little old women.
I thought that when you went to the division chiefs, I had a feeling that's where you're headed. But
actually what happened is that when a little old man died, his wife might be invited into the society.
Oh, really?
Yeah, depending upon the degree of wisdom that they believed that she possessed. And these women were esteemed because of their wisdom and their knowledge of the nation's affair. Now, that tells us something, too. It tells us that husband and wives of these little old men, that the little old men talked to their wives, and they shared, yeah. And the society itself was respected knowledge and wisdom. What a neat government.
Absolutely.
The society at times dominated the nation at peace. When war came about, it stepped back and leadership fell to what was called the Grand Chiefs. The Osage were a fierce foe. First of all, they were bigger than just about anybody else. They were strong. Even the boys and old men were equal to other warriors. There's a great example of that when a whole bunch of Osage warriors had gone on to a hunt, and another Indian nation found out about this, and they attacked the city of Claremore in Oklahoma.
Oh, yeah.
All they had was boys and old men, and they put up such a fight that the other Indian nation was thrown back.
Awesome.
So, yeah. There's one occasion that's recorded that it took an entire Spanish garrison to subdue one Osage warrior who they were trying to arrest. His name was the Scar. And I think he caused some scars.
Maybe been there before.
Yeah, maybe so. Normally, the Osage are not aggressive people, but nobody pushed them around either. And it seems as though the only area in which they were really militant was toward the west. And they showed their militancy in a strange kind of a way.
Okay.
You know, the unfortunate recipients of their wrath was a group called the Canoe people. Again, these are Kansans. Mm-hmm. They love their agriculture. They're sedentary people. It's the Osage that want to go through their territory because of the buffalo hunts. Mm-hmm. And so what they do is they intimidate these people to move. And they begin what's called bluff wars. In a bluff war, an Osage warrior would paint his face with either black or red on top, and the bottom part of the face would be yellow. They would stand at bow length away from the other side, so neither side could shoot each other by way of bows, but they would stand at bow length away, and then they would... Burns says they engaged in, and I quote here, in finger talk, in order to insult the Canoe.
Oh, my gosh.
Now, if you've ever been around teenage boys, you know you don't need the definition of what that is.
No, we can figure that out on radio.
That's right. Okay, we'll just leave it at that. So here you have the Osage doing some finger talking to the Canoes. It was enough to scare the Canoes.
Oh, my gosh. Back
into their fortified villages. And in some cases, after a couple of these finger talk battles, they simply moved. And so the Osage got their way.
Wow.
And so they weren't interested in killing the Canoes. They just wanted their territory. They just wanted to move through.
We want the buffalo.
We want the buffalo. That's right. Yeah.
Wow.
But the other side of that is, in war, you don't play around with the Osage. When they're going to be real, they're real. In
a sense, they're giving their warning. We can attack if we need to.
Yeah.
But we're giving you a warning. Yeah. Move now.
Move now, yeah. Mm-hmm. Could be worse.
It could be worse, exactly.
Yeah. You might remember that back in the French and Indian War, an Osage military expedition was sent out east, remember, to help. I think it was Fort Duquesne.
I remember.
Remember that?
Yes.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And so...
they were very helpful to the priests and the...
Right.
But there were only a few, but there were only a couple priests there, right?
These were during the French and Indian War. They were contesting with George Washington.
Yes, okay.
Yeah.
Okay, I was thinking, what Indian tribe was it when there were two priests, one on either side?
Oh, I think you're thinking of the Tamaroa.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, wonderful people themselves.
Yes, exactly.
You know? Yeah.
And the conversions that there were.
Oh, yeah. Mm. Well, later on, the Osage will be asking, they'll come to Bishop Dubourg and ask for a priest also. Do we have time to talk about the whole concept of tripartite governments? We don't.
Oh, we have like 2.5 minutes, Father.
Okay, let me give you a teaser then. And next time around, we'll go and talk about it at some length. Because Burns has a very interesting theory about this. It turns out that in 1725... there was an explorer in the area. He was a Frenchman exploring the area. His name was Etienne de Bourgemont. And he brought several of the little Osage to Paris.
Oh.
And introduced them to the courts in Paris. And Burns points out that this was right around the same time that Charles de Montesquieu wrote a book called The Spirit of Law, in which he talks about tripartite governments and law and all of these sorts of things. And Burns speculates that perhaps Montesquieu, which is the foundation of our whole Enlightenment jurisprudence or government, he believes is possibly grounded in these noble savages, quote unquote, the noble savages, which took Europe by storm anyway around that same time. Everyone was talking about, Rousseau was always talking about the noble savage and all that. Where did they get those ideas? And Burns thinks it was this 1525 visit of the Osage to Paris.
My goodness, that is amazing.
Now, isn't that a nice teaser for the next time around?
It really it is. You know what? It is. I can't wait to go a little farther into that, Monsignor.
Okay, we'll start with that next time
Okay, that
around.
sounds great. Yeah. Oh, my gosh, fantastic. So definitely, this was show number 20, so make sure you're listening for 21 as well as we begin to see where our governments came from.
Maybe. Maybe.
Right. All right. Well, thank you again, Monsignor.
Yeah.
Can we close with prayer?
Sure. Glory be to the Father, to the Son, and to the Holy Spirit.
As it was in the beginning, is now, and ever shall be, world without end. Amen.
St. Louis, King of France.
Pray for us.
In the name of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit.
Amen.
We hope you enjoyed the program and will join us back for another show on WCAT Radio. This is Sebastian Mahfood. Good day.